Welcome to Bedtime Stories Factory, where from thought to tale imagination sails. Don't forget hit the subscribe button and ring the bell, so you never miss a tale. Now snuggle up, relax and let your imagination drift away with us. In a bustling city full of towering buildings and endless noise, lived an urban squirrel named Sammy. Sammy enjoyed the fast-paced city life, where food was abundant, and adventure was always around the corner. Meanwhile, in a quiet woodland on the edge of a serene forest, lived a woodland squirrel named Wendy. Wendy's days were peaceful and filled with the natural beauty of the trees, streams, and open meadows. Although their lives were very different, Sammy and Wendy were old friends who loved to visit each other whenever they could. This is the story of one such visit, where two different worlds collide. One crisp autumn morning, Wendy the Woodland Squirrel was busy gathering acorns, pine nuts, and berries to prepare for the coming winter. Wendy's nest was nestled high in an ancient oak tree, overlooking a babbling brook. The forest was calm, with the soft rustling of leaves and the distant call of birds. As Wendy arranged her collection of nuts and berries in her cozy nest, she spotted a familiar figure in the distance. It was Sammy, the urban squirrel, arriving for a visit. Sammy had taken a train from the city to visit Wendy in her peaceful woodland. As he arrived, Sammy immediately noticed the quiet that surrounded him. "How do you live in such silence?" Sammy asked, his voice breaking the tranquility. Wendy just smiled and welcomed her friend warmly, offering him a freshly picked acorn. "This is how I live," Wendy said, gesturing to the trees and the open sky. "It's simple, but it's home." Wendy decided to prepare a special woodland meal for Sammy, gathering fresh produce from the forest. She picked wild berries, gathered mushrooms, and selected the finest acorns and pine nuts. Wendy even found a sweet apple that had fallen from a nearby tree. She carefully arranged the food on a broad leaf and poured cool, clear water from the stream into a tiny carved wooden cup. Sammy, used to the rich and varied foods of the city, looked at the simple meal with a mixture of curiosity and surprise. "Where's the cheese? The bread? The pastries?" Sammy asked, raising an eyebrow. Wendy laughed softly. "This is what we eat here in the woods. It's fresh, natural, and full of flavor," she said, taking a bite of an acorn. Sammy hesitated but eventually tried a berry. To his surprise, it was bursting with sweetness. "Not bad," he admitted, though he still longed for the city's abundance. Sammy began to share stories of his life in the city. He talked about the skyscrapers that touched the clouds, the bustling streets filled with people, and the endless supply of food found in parks, markets, and trash bins. "The city is amazing, Wendy," Sammy said with excitement. "I have everything I need within a short walk. There's always something new to see and do. You must visit me and experience it for yourself." Wendy listened intently, fascinated by Sammy's descriptions but also slightly overwhelmed. The idea of noisy streets and towering buildings was so different from her quiet life among the trees. Still, a part of Wendy was curious. Could city life really be as wonderful as Sammy described? That night, as Wendy lay in her nest, the stories of the city swirled in her mind. She imagined herself darting through busy streets, dining on exotic foods, and exploring the tall buildings Squirrel Sammy had described. In her dreams, Squirrel Wendy wore a shiny coat and fancy hat, just like the squirrels in the city. She dined at a rooftop cafe, where the tables were laden with cheese, bread, and pastries. "How marvelous," she thought as she nibbled on a piece of cheese. But as the dream continued, Squirrel Wendy found herself lost in a maze of tall buildings and noisy streets. The noise grew louder and louder, until it was unbearable. Squirrel Wendy woke with a start, the sounds of the forest comforting her once more. Could the city really be as wonderful as Squirrel Sammy says? Squirrel Wendy wondered. The next morning, she decided to find out for herself. Early the next day, Wendy packed a small bag with her favorite acorns and berries. Sammy, excited to show Wendy his world, led the way as they traveled back to the city. As they arrived, Wendy was immediately struck by the noise and the crowds. Cars honked, people shouted, and the tall buildings seemed to close in around her. "This is the city?" Wendy asked, a bit unsure. Sammy nodded enthusiastically. "Isn't it amazing?" he exclaimed. They made their way to Sammy's home, a small space in a large city park. The park was green and full of trees, but it was surrounded by concrete and noise. Sammy led Wendy to his home, which turned out to be a tiny hole in a tree, shared with several other city squirrels. Wendy was surprised by how cramped and busy it was. "Where do you sleep?" Wendy asked. Sammy pointed to a small corner filled with bits of cloth and paper. "It's cozy," he said with a grin. Wendy wasn't so sure. That evening, Sammy took Wendy to a grand feast. They climbed up to the roof of a tall building, where a human family had left behind a picnic. There was cheese, bread, cookies, and even some Chinese takeout. Wendy was amazed at the variety of food. But just as they were beginning to enjoy the feast, the door to the roof creaked open. A large, sleek cat slinked out, its eyes gleaming in the darkness. "Run!" shouted Sammy, grabbing Wendy's paw. The two squirrels dashed across the rooftop, with the cat hot on their tails. They barely made it to a small crack in the wall, squeezing inside just in time to escape the cat's sharp claws. Shaken, Wendy and Sammy waited in the dark until they were sure the cat was gone. When they finally emerged, they found that the feast had been cleared away by the humans. All that remained were a few crumbs. Wendy's heart sank. "Is this what city life is like?" Wendy asked softly. Sammy nodded, a bit sheepishly. "It's not always like this," he said, "but it can be dangerous. You have to be quick and always watch out for cats and other threats." Wendy thought about her quiet woodland home, where the only sounds were the rustling of leaves and the songs of birds. She realized that while the city was exciting, it wasn't the safe and peaceful place she loved. The next morning, Wendy packed her bag and prepared to leave. "Where are you going?" Sammy asked, surprised. "Home," Wendy replied. "Thank you for showing me the city, but it's not for me. I miss the trees, the quiet, and my cozy nest. I realize now that I belong in the woods." Sammy understood, though he was sad to see Wendy go. He helped her call a taxi to take her to the train station. As Wendy rode the train back to the woodland, she felt a sense of relief. The closer she got to the forest, the more at peace she felt. When she finally arrived home, Wendy climbed into her nest, surrounded by the familiar sights and sounds of the woods. Wendy smiled as she drifted off to sleep, grateful for the adventure but happy to be back where she truly belonged.